Hello, record ceremony. Another beautiful episode that's going to be very nice, short, sweet, and full of good content. And I am super grateful today to have a newer friend of mine, but someone I met through his podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself? And thanks for being here.
Yeah, my name's Cello. I host I would say it's not really a music podcast, but it is a music podcast where I just sit down and talk with music creatives to kind of learn more about life myself. It's funny. It's like, if you have Selma Hayek on a podcast, you don't talk about acting school with her. You just talk about life. And I was wondering, every time you have a musician on a podcast, why you always have to talk about music? Why can't we approach it the same way? So I felt like there was a niche in the podcasting world, and I aimed to fill it. So, and that's how we connected, and we've been keeping in touch ever since.
And what's the name of your podcast?
The name of the podcast is Bedroom Beethovens, mainly because I'm pretty sure Dr. Dre isn't going to be a guest anytime soon. So I focus on people that, might not have a fancy studio. Yeah. They want to make music in their bedrooms.
So we were talking a bit before we started recording here. I'm sticking to the 15-minute format. Record Ceremony as a podcast has been the worst consistent product I've ever created in my life, but it's also become like an exercise regime. It's kind of like having a gym membership without going ever, and then showing up once in a while, be like, this place stinks, I'm leaving, or whatever. That's how my relationship with the podcast is. And so here we are. We're going to knock it out again. I just did one, the 15 minutes last time. Thank you so much for joining me. I find your podcast wonderful. I encourage everybody here to subscribe. Bedroom Beethovens. It's right up my alley. I guess my perspective is you consistently have to and do find a wide variety of producers and beat makers, and you talk to them with a lot of insight. You do a lot of prep to learn about the individual, and then you kind of are able to move forward from that point. How did you figure out in your podcast that you wanted to do that work ahead of time and present some things to them that might, I don't know, what's the benefit? I guess they're more comfortable automatically, or how do you view all that?
There's two ways I approach it. One is I don't do video because I feel like people have their guard down more if they're not looking at a camera. So I'm trying to get, I don't want to spend 10 minutes of every 40-minute interview warming them up. I want them to be open with me from the first second. And so number two is just, another reason is, I needed like kind of a pre-pandemic hobby where if I'm working from home, and just because I'm in my mid-30s doesn't mean I can't grow as a human. So learning other people's stories is a good way for me to gain insight. And I think music producers are one of the most creative people on the planet. And I don't want to box them in just because they know about loops and samples. I want to know how they view life and maybe get some interesting stories out of them.
Yeah. I haven't mentioned any guests so far in our interview just now. Are there certain examples of moments that stick with you from some of your interviews that might give the listeners an insight into what they can expect or what made an impression on you from your own series?
You know what? So, you're familiar with Blockhead? He's a producer who did work with Aesop Rock, and those type of people have been in the game for 20, 25 years, and he's an upcoming episode. I talked to him and he was like, you know what? When you start a podcast, you don't have to be you don't have to be the Joe Rogan. As long as you're a guy who's passionate about music, that's a good starting point, because when you've been in the game as long as me, you can tell from the first second if someone gives a shit or not. And it's going to affect the interview. So I wanted to make sure that I'm doing the research, that I'm a personal fan, that all these things come through to where they're going to know that I'm genuinely interested in them, so they can open up. If I'm not getting paid to do the podcast, so it's not an assignment, it's not work, it's a labor of love, and all that has to come through, or else we're going to be wasting both of our time. So that's kind of how I approach it.
I respect that, and I got to say, in this series, I definitely went the other route. I approached, I guess I did I don't even know if I published it, but is it Joseph Leinberg? Is that his name? He's a trumpet player from West Coast. He's dope. We did one. It was just a mess. I did one for Nick Hakim, which I was super excited about, but it sounds like he was just walking around taking the trash out the whole time. So it's been good to have other perspectives. So also, man, something we want to talk about today, and maybe even more important than our podcast interests, Even though I did want people to get to know you for that lens, because that's how I know you. And also definitely, once again, check out Bedroom Beethovens as a podcast. You know, I don't say to do things that I don't care about. So check it out if you're into stuff I do. But you live in Texas, and I've learned that through the podcast. As I recall, you're somewhere around Austin, and you can clarify that for me. But as we record this, it is February 18th, 2021. And I, this morning, saw a live IG recording that Bun B did, and I started to just honestly search for the hashtag of Texas just to see what people are posting, because what Texas is going through right now in some parts, maybe not all parts, I don't know, you can fill us in on that, is catastrophic and a huge failure from what I can tell in infrastructure, plumbing, electricity, all this stuff going down because it's extremely cold down there, and that is rare. Can you help us clarify any of that?
Well, it's funny. It's almost like learning about 9/11 from Ja Rule. You know, you had to learn about it from Bun B. And it's at first I was kind of annoyed that we have to get our news about Texas from a rapper who has a net worth of $4 million. But then I thought, well, no matter how many square feet or how nice the amenities are in a house, he does have a point. The pipes in Texas, the insulation, it's not built for something like this. So no matter who you are, I don't care if it's Joe Rogan or Sandra Bullock or Lance Armstrong, Scarface, Willie Nelson. If they're not outside the scope of these problems, if you live in Texas, you know, and it's really funny. I messaged you last week or last month, and I told you that I took my family to an Airbnb in the mountains of Santa Fe. And there's a reason I did that. It was because my 6-year-old is here with me, and I wanted her to experience snow. I have a husky who loves cold weather. I wanted her to have snow. I booked a few days in New Mexico. We had a great time. And then a month later, I realized I never needed to make that trip because Texas got snow, which was nice. But now, a few weeks after that, we get snow again and ice, and it's lasting a week. So now we have an anomaly, and this is what is causing all the headlines. So for influencers like Bun B, who can report the news to a demographic that may or not be aware of what's going on, it's kind of like COVID-19. It's supremely mishandled because it's something that no one thought would happen. It's a once in 100-year occurrence. Texas is freezing over. You know, places that usually average, 50 degrees Fahrenheit are experiencing 15. And when I woke up, it was 7 degrees outside, and we don't know what to do.
Yeah, right. Damn. So, I have probably switched my news consumption over to podcasts like The Daily and all that, which has its ups initially and maybe downs in this respect because they don't talk about everything. I used to be I don't like the term religious about anything, but consistent consumer of Democracy Now! And then certain things about that threw me off. So just to say, I'm trying to work through and think through why I don't know more about this event. It's also probably because of due to COVID, I find myself in heightened areas of addressing need in my own community. And so I'm paying less attention to other communities because I'm so focused on what's right in front of me and the needs that are here, because this is a poor community who can handle snow well. But it's unfortunate, and there's always so much going on in the world. But there's something about this happening right now that sounds to be and seems to be way bigger than I recall it. Honestly, I'm having flashbacks now to when there was flooding down in Houston. So what do you think the outcome of all this is? What do you foresee? What are you hearing from friends and family? And just what are you seeing in your life in Texas at this point?
Well, let me tell you a little bit of the inner workings on why this is affecting Texas. And maybe you can kind of relate to why this isn't happening in New Mexico. So we have an organization called ERCOT that manages the power grid in Texas. And I think Elon Musk just slammed them on Twitter either today or yesterday. And a lot of companies oversee individual parts, but ERCOT is responsible for managing all of those companies and helping keep the power grid stable in Texas. That means when there's low demand, they shut down power plants or run them at lower capacity. It also means that they manage how energy enters the system through wind turbines or solar energy or whatever. So a lot of Texans like myself, we have electric heat, and most of those have a heat pump. And these are just very inefficient at providing heat as the temperature gets lower. But, this isn't a problem because in many parts of Texas, the temperature only approaches freezing, I don't know, like once every couple of years. So now it's a big problem. It means that these people are also using auxiliary heat installed in the heat pumps, and it consumes a lot of electricity the ERCOT grid has collapsed in exactly the same manner as the old Soviet Union. You know, it limped along on underinvestment and neglect until it finally broke under predictable circumstances. And, you know, Bun B may or may not have known about it, but if I DM'd Bun B last year and told him to invest some money into it, it wouldn't have been a priority, or anyone else who has wealth in the state, you know? So now people are saying, hey, you know, drip your faucets, you know, don't put your thermostats above 63 degrees, fill your tubs up with water just in case you have reserve toilet water and you need it. It's just, there's just a lot of unpractical and dumb ways to conserve energy that, you know, the government or senators are telling us. And, you know, because I'm a spoiled Texan, I need to be comfortable at all times, even if my neighbor isn't. You know, it is what it is. Maybe I'm human and I'm admitting that. But now I'm realizing people are dying. A family of 4 tried to heat themselves up in a car and died from carbon monoxide poisoning. I mean, we're just all ill-equipped. We're very uneducated. We don't know how to handle it. And Miles, you say you're no expert, but I challenge that, because I would argue that if you're not Amish or you live in a third world country, less than 2% of people who aren't homeless have no idea how to sustain themselves in a small enclosed trailer with no heat or a heatless shed in the winter. You know, we had a 30-minute conversation on my podcast, and I think I spent a third of that talking about how you're able to learn about the basics of creating a livable environment in various ecosystems, you know, without electricity, and thrive as an educator and a musician. And I spent so much time on that subject because I think it's a core strength that I'll never have. And I'm sure a lot of Texans share in that sentiment.
Well, I hear you. And I'm really glad you're on this podcast, because you're great to listen to. But yo, so you know what I mean? You know, it's hard, bro. It's hard for me spiritually at this point, because you know, I've only worked in social service kind of stuff because I thought it was the best way to spend time on something that wasn't music that was worth time. But just to say that, you know, again, back to the beginning, I learned through Bun B more about what's happening in Texas. It's my fault as much as anybody else's, perhaps. But it's Bun B, who's known as a rapper, telling me about the social circumstances of his state and our community. I say that to say that I've always tried to keep music and my day work very separate, because I wanted to have my music be a refreshing experience and escape from me that has nothing to do with anything else, so I can feel free to do it. You know, I don't have a manager. No one's telling me what to do. It's just pure freedom, right? So at this point, though, it's equally disappointing on the flip side of that card that I make an attempt, and this sounds selfish, I get it, and I'm working through this. I make an attempt to try to be like, world, ask me questions, and I'm here to help, right? And why did I say on the post on Instagram to add a video message? Because when it comes to housing, it's very political. There's a lot of issues surrounding laws and what people want you to do or not, and taxes and zoning and all this stuff. So if someone's going to ask me a question, I want to see who they were, because I'm going to hold them accountable too, right? But it doesn't bother me. It does bother me for whatever reason that no one asked me any questions. But the reason I think it bothers me is because I want to help people. And it's probably, and I love your feedback on this, it's probably more a reflection of the fact that I have not presented my channels on the internet as means of learning about these things. So when I try to bring them up, it seems out of nowhere and the audience isn't there. Yet the irony is I haven't been talking about this stuff because I've been learning so much myself and going through so many personal things. I need to figure out what is okay to talk about and not, because this is such a political topic, and it doesn't need to be, but it's increasingly something that's just hitting us all in the face either way.
Well, I tell people to listen to Lumberjack Soul 2, not because it's a good record, but because I consider you a veteran of the game, right? You know how to produce a record, you know how to play instruments, but you grew sonically based on how you chose to live your life. You live outside the music scene. You're not in LA, you're not in New York, and you're physically alone in the woods in New Mexico, focusing on the love you have for your family. And what came about was this project. Bun B only made that video because he didn't have running water. His amenities were scaling back. He had power, but he didn't have any water. So if he was fine, if he was comfortable with that video, even have come out. So I think that you walk the walk, you talk the talk on every day, not just when your resources are down or when you're facing hardship. And I think when people start realizing that, you'll be able to amplify your message to a lot more people.
Okay. I do have a lot of footage from that period, and I've been wanting to make a documentary someday, but I simply wanted to wait long enough to the point where when I shared it, it would be seen as a resource and not like I'm some renegade.
Well, I mean, that's how you live your life. So I think there's authenticity in that.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, man, what else? We hit the 15-minute mark, but you know, I love talking to you. Anything else you want to share about what you're involved in, what your thoughts on the world are? Anything you want to speak about regarding my new kind of point of fascination of the intersection of music and community? Or what would you like to leave listeners with as they get to know you here on this podcast, if they haven't yet listened to the Bedroom Beethoven series, which I encourage them to do?
Well, if I want to remain topical, and I'll make this quick, I just want to say that while Texas is currently under the spotlight, there is a message in this for all of us. It's that nowhere is immune. People count on all forms of energy for basics. As we power ahead with efforts to speed up energy transition, we must also make sure that the system that deliver energy continue to function. So what happened to the power grid in Texas could happen anywhere: weather, cyber attacks, or just happenstance. So what scares me is how much I rely on stable power in my home to earn income. I mean, I'm going to be thinking about these things way beyond this point, and I encourage everyone to do the same. The way that you view this podcast of yours about how you go to a gym and it's stinky and you go home, I think of it a different way. It might not be consistent, but when you do show up to the gym once every 5 months, people are gonna be like, oh, he must have been really motivated that day to come here. So when these episodes come out, it may not be, on a consistent basis, but when they come out, it was like, oh, he must have had a dose of inspiration or motivation, and it's out. So I think it is important when these episodes come out. My podcast, when it comes out, it's this podcast that you want to pay attention to and subscribe to. And I wish we had more than 15 minutes, Bonnie. And I'm very depressed that we don't get to connect as much as we could. But I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to talk to you and provide any value to your podcast.
Thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure, and let's just do this more often because, again, I need my my distractions from what other people ask me to do in the daytime, and perhaps we can just check in once in a while. You're good at this, you know how it goes. You're efficient, and we'll just knock these out. So thanks for everything you do. Thanks for joining us today. Check out Bedroom Beethoven's podcast, and stay well, man, and let's definitely stay in touch.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, brother. Peace.